Good evening. If we could all come in and grab a seat close to the front, that would be great. We're going to kick off the InSight community meeting here. It'll be very informal. Our superintendent, Mr. Connor, will have a little introduction, and then if you have a question, just raise your hand. I'll bring the microphone to you. The reason you have to talk into the microphone is so that we're streaming this live so other people who aren't here can see it later. Okay? So, and then the school board members will answer the questions, or the superintendent, whoever's most suitable to answer it. So with that, I'll turn it over to our superintendent, Mr. Connor.
Well, good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to see you here today. This is our third InSight community session. We started this back in May last year, and then we had our second InSight session in September. Today is our third of the year. This is a conversation. So one of the reasons we wanted to use a format like this is because typically in a regular board meeting setting, we hear from public comment, and I know many times, at least I'll speak for myself, you would like to comment back, but it's really not the appropriate time to have those types of exchanges. So we wanted to create an avenue, an opportunity to really engage thoughtfully and conversationally with our community. We have, I believe, having worked over 4 school districts in the state of Florida, I think Sarasota is wonderfully engaged in education. We have a great community who is very, very supportive of the educational work that's happening in our public school system. We have an engaged community that attends our board meetings and has a lot to say about what's happening in schools, legislatively around the state. And I know it could be a great opportunity to really get inside of the heads of each of us to talk about some of those issues that are pressing or on top of mind for you as a constituent. One of the things that we feel, obviously, our core mission is to make sure that our students are learning at the highest level. And so as superintendent, my priority, and if you look at our strategic plan, you can really see what our priorities are as a board, is to make sure that we are providing that quality educational experience for our students. And that comes in a lot, I mean, how you deliver on that there's a lot of factors involved in that. And so, you know, as you maybe listen into our workshops each month, you'll see that there are pertinent topics that are related to that strategic plan. One of the topics that we discussed actually this afternoon that I wanted to at least broach with the community is, because we're continuing to take feedback, is the new legislative change in middle and high school start times. So that law was passed 2 years ago, and it is now to a point where it will take effect at the beginning of the next school year. So August of 26, the state of Florida will be enacting the new start time legislation. Last year, though, there was a provision in the law that was updated to allow school districts to waive, based on whatever criteria, justification, rationale, whether that be financial, you know, a multitude of reasons logistically that could be barriers for a school district to implement those new start times. So in essence, what the law says is that middle schools would not be able to start until after 8 o'clock. High schools would not be able to start to after 8:30. So how does that impact Sarasota County? Currently, our high schools start at 7:30 for the majority of them. Our middle schools are already meeting that requirement because they all start at 9:30 for the most part. And our elementaries are around that 8:15 to 8:30 benchmark. So, and they're not affected by the new law. But if the new law were to go into effect, it would require us to move elementary earlier. So school would be starting roughly around 7:45 for elementaries. Middle schools would most likely stay where they're at 9:30, and high school would start at 8:30. Having taken a variety of stakeholder feedback, we have done surveys with our staff. We have put out surveys to our community. We have been a part of these sessions talking about that idea. We've gotten a lot of feedback around that, and I think that feedback supports the notion that our community would want to stay with its current model, where high school starts at 7:30, elementary at 8:30, and our middle schools at 9:30. Now, there are some caveats there. I say that broadly, but we do have some schools that may start at 8:15 or 9:15. And one of the recommendations that I made to the board today was that we remain on those 3 tiers that we're currently on in that order, with the exception of some of our schools that are off a little bit, maybe by 15 minutes, where they're not starting at 8:30, they're starting at 8:15, that we move those schools so that we have consistency of just about all of our schools starting at 7:30, 8:30, or 9:30, because that hour in between is really critical for transportation. And we have faced a lot of logistical issues this year with making sure that schools, that students are arriving on time and they're being dropped off on time. And so that 15 minutes makes a huge difference for us. And we're excited about some of the technologies that we're going to be bringing online next year for transportation. But this is just another strategy to help improve our level of service with overall transportation. So that would be the only adjustments to school start times based on the recommendation I provided to the board, is to move about nine of our schools from 8:15 to 8:30. Ashton, I know, is 8, so it would move 30 minutes to 8:30. So that'd be a 30-minute change. But our schools that are doing, like our Pine Views, that are district-wide transportation due to its magnet program, I know Venice Middle has been historically at a 7:30 for many, many years. Those would remain because those programs, they're specialized programs there that we would keep in place and not disrupt the continuity there. The good thing is that they would still be in one of those tiers, 7:30, 8:30, or 9:30. And so I open up and I share that with this group to, if there is any feedback that you'd like to provide to us as we're continuing to consider this recommendation. We are going to most likely have this approved very soon, that whatever direction we go, so that we can start informing the community if there are any impacts there. So I'll start there, but then after that, this is really kind of an open forum. Whatever's on your mind, top of mind you want to talk about, this is your time to speak to the board or myself and have a conversation. So I teed it up with start times if anyone wants to speak about that. If not, let's open up the door. And board members, if you have any opening comments or anything you'd like to say, I know we got a small, intimate crowd today.
I can't believe we had to spend time on what time schools are opening and closing. That seems like a ridiculous thing. I don't know. Because I vaguely remember them talking about high school aged kids that are really not awake, and that they were talking about having the high schools open later because of that. But this seems it's the opposite. The high schools are going to open at 7:30. Is that what you said?
So what it is currently, they have been operating at 7:30. They're our first tiered transportation. So students have been operating with this for many years.
Okay, but what time are the high schools going to open now?
The same.
7:30. Okay, which
7:30.
I understood was the reason to change it in the first place. And so it goes. But on a positive note, I have to say, I think I sound like your #1 fan, but Superintendent Connor, you have been the epitome of patience. I have no idea how you fall down on a lot of these issues. You maintain diplomacy, which is unbelievable. And I also understand that I wish people understood more the difference in the school population, because they pick on all kinds of things, not realizing that public schools have to take everyone, whether you are a special needs, non-communicative, or a genius. And I don't think people get that this is a huge, I don't even want to call it a burden, it's a responsibility, and it's what public schools should be about, taking care of everyone. So school choice is marvelous, but I have a little school, I take you in, I get your money. Oh, you're not really fitting in, and I don't really think that you really belong in my school, so I kick you back, but I keep the money. What kind of a thing is that? I'm sorry for going on so long, but what can I tell you?
It's hard to follow that up because it's always Rana. But first, I just want to offer a comment. I fully support the plan to keep the school times where they are. I must say I went to Booker Middle before I came here to Booker High. 7:30 a.m. start time really prepared me for high school. I'm not going to lie. I know kids who came here from McIntosh, they're like that 9:15 to 7:30 is a big jump over a year. So I absolutely support that. So my question for all of you, and I'd appreciate it if all of you guys could answer, is ever since the meetings moved to 10 a.m., we've not seen a student representative as common. I know at the first meeting we had an Oak Park student who was there for a moment, and then the last meeting we had no student representative. So one, is there a plan to bring a student representative back to the school board? And two, if there is a plan, could we consider an election process where students are able to elect the student representative to sit on the board? I know that over a dozen school boards across the state have that ability, and I just want to hear all of your guys' thoughts on that. And yeah, thank you.
I'd like to defer to Superintendent Connor, who makes those arrangements with principals of where we stand right now. Before I comment, I look to his recommendation for what is happening and what will happen, and I would follow suit from there.
Yeah, thank you for that. You bring up a good point, and what we have to make sure is moving forward is that is strategically scheduled. And I think our high school students obviously have a little flexibility where typically our seniors have a little bit of ability to do that and maneuver their schedule in a way and working it out with their schools to make sure that there is representation. So honestly, that ball just got dropped this past meeting, I believe, because it was in our November meeting. So we will pick that up in December.
And if I may, because also was discussed about student presentations being part of our board meetings commonly, and that is something that Mr. Connor had also mentioned in past places he's seen where the entire actual board meeting was dedicated to that. So it remains a priority in making sure that there is escalation or representation and recognition, when it comes to the students. So that is all things that we will be discussing and executing accordingly.
I'm shorter. So that was one of the first questions that I asked Superintendent Connor, how would we have the student representation? And he said he had several ideas from other districts, and I'll be able to answer that more specifically when we get some of those recommendations. But I do know the one was that you have a whole school board meeting where you have the representation. And he is going to have other venues for student representation and decision-making. So I'm just waiting, because I think all of us, I can't speak for every board member, but I think we all enjoy that and know how important it is to have student representation and the presentations.
I will just say that I remain on the place of solving a problem that we didn't need to have to face. I said all along that the problem with 10 o'clock was the student representation and the moments of pride, which should be at every school board meeting, not just one that we celebrate throughout the year. So I still remain committed to that concept.
I'll just say I have not been a proponent of the 10 a.m. meetings, that being one of the reasons, because I do think it's important for students to be able to participate in the governing body that most closely impacts them. And I had been sort of looking forward to expanding the student representative process. I thought, you know, in the past, it's been wonderful to have a student rep there, but I thought maybe we didn't always get a huge diversity of types of students to serve in that role. And so I'm interested in that idea about electing students, but I defer to the board majority and the superintendent because I'm not sure how to make that work with the meeting being during the school day.
So thank you all for being here. I'm really excited that all of our board members are here. I'm Tamara Solom, you know, some of you know me. I had sent an email about the Schools of Hope and utilization of space and I mentioned it at the last board meeting about, I don't know where you all are with the Schools of Hope, so that was one of my questions as far as possibly utilizing the space for your business partners who provide after-school activities and using it as maybe a workshop space during school hours so that it's taken up if you have underutilized space. And then my other question or comment was, I understand you can't have dialogue at the school board meetings, but part of our coming is to be heard and to be acknowledged. And I appreciate having a town hall where we can talk, but I know a lot of people also can't make these with the holidays coming up. And I did speak to a teacher before I came to ask her what she felt was impacting her school right now. And I would like your feedback on that, which is that they have lost funding for their behavior specialists and a lot of behavior coaches and the people who help manage the classrooms. And her concern is that they're not able to find time to teach things that help children with managing social and emotional skills, even though we don't use those terms. What are you doing to address these problems that are happening right now in our schools with the behavior issues and the teachers having not the support that they feel that they need?
Yeah, so those are definitely pressing issues. You know, as we made some financial decisions over the summer, one of those included our behavior specialist. And the reason that was one of the first things on the list, because we know it's a valuable position, but when they were funded just 2 years ago, and I say that because we have to remember this is not a long-standing, have been in place for multiple years, and it was a COVID era decision, right? And much needed at that time, and still to this day. Those were funded with what I would call dollars that are going to sunset, and they have sunset. And so those were the first on the block for chopping when we were faced with shortfalls financially. In terms of the schools, obviously we know that we typically see higher incidences of behavior in our Title I schools. In our Title I settings, those schools still do have a behavior coach. They were allocated that through their Title I funding. And so that support is there. In our non-Title I schools, you still have behavior issues. It's not that they don't exist. So what we're working with is through our student services team around that tiered approach to behavior. How do we address it through MTSS? How do we support our teachers with professional learning? Classroom management, we need to have more strategic, targeted interventions for our staff around how to deal with that. And then, of course, when it escalates to a level of very high disruption, what's in place school-wide to handle student discipline? And those conversations are problem solved really on a daily basis. You know, when we see incidents, we do have some schools that have behavior clusters, which I would say if the student has a disability for behavior disorders, that we provide an extra layer of support. We have an ESE behavior interventionist at every one of those sites. We have what we call behavior techs that are there to help support if there is an escalation to a high degree. So it's not that we're not without that support, it's just to the level at which it was prior, not over the last 2 years. It has been reduced. So in order to support that, how do we handle it now that we don't have those hands on deck? It really does come through a targeted strategic approach, and that's what we're working with every day. Our student services are the top of mind around how to support our schools as behaviors are escalating, and they've been escalating over several years. This is a national trend that we're seeing, and when talking to superintendents, is that there are more escalations of student behaviors than we've seen in the past. And I don't know if that's, we all blame everything on COVID, right? I think we got to get to a point where we don't do that anymore. But at some point, it seems as if since that time, we've seen increased amounts. And so what mental health supports, what wraparound services, counseling, all of those things that we can do. And so that is definitely the multi-layered approach that we're taking to help with that.
I'd like to add, it's even more challenging, I think, for the community, and righteously so for staff, because the current service level is being compared to when there was so much money coming for COVID relief, and it was being put into, for a good reason, into those kinds of support systems, so they were really built up, and when that COVID relief ended, you're starting to miss those pieces. But speaking as a principal for 14 years, there's a lot of things that I know that our district staff works with principals with. For example, one thing is scheduling. When you're looking at your students that may have some challenges, whether they are behavioral or academic, is who are they being scheduled with? How are they being scheduled? How many students are being scheduled together? How do you offer professional development for strategies to teachers and staff that's convenient for them, that doesn't become an extra? How does that happen in unison with teacher representation, the teachers union? There's a lot of levels that can go into that, and for me, it was a negotiation with staff, with school advisory council, with parents of how do we level that out to have the greatest impact, to have positive results for students. How do you work towards having academics, how does a student feel success academically? There are so many layers to what you are addressing with validity, but I know that our staff is well equipped in addressing those pieces. I think the challenge is the withdrawal of having all of those resources.
Yeah, no, I would echo that. I think anytime you give something, the risk of having to take it away, I mean, take anything in any working environment or even at home, when you get the use to some kind of benefit and it gets diminished for any reason, it is challenging. And I do recall when you talk about funding, and that was money that sunsetted, and this is an issue that many districts did and didn't do very well, and I know it was a conversation as a board we had. It's always concerning to put positions with non-recurring money, because that will end, and what do you supplement that with? Coupled with, and it was before COVID, I'll never forget when I first got on the board dealing with the executive director of our student services at that time, who had been doing this for decades, and said that they'd never seen the behavior issues as early on as they are seeing, and the rise of it. And this is back in 2015-16. There is a real issue, and the hardest part, and I just read a survey recently, and this won't be news to anyone here, but one of the #1 reasons that teachers leave is behavior, because it is just an untenable situation. And so I think as a community, and it's not something the school district can solve by themselves by any measure. And I know we talked about parental rights today, and I said parental rights and responsibilities. There's a lot of things that home life has to take a part of it as well, because unfortunately I think there's many times when that's not being addressed, and then it's looked at to the teachers or the school district to manage and answer all those questions. And the heart is there, but it's untenable. And so there's a lot of layers to that piece, and I think it's a much more robust conversation and position. We have to work within the budget that we have, and there's a lot of moving parts there. But I think that's it's a monumental task. It's something we all know exists, but we have to be also reasonable to what is capable within the confines and what we're also asking our staff to do, while they're also impacting many other students at the same time.
And what are the resources that teachers have? When I look at school-wide support team, and there were times traditionally where teachers would come into school-wide support team and they would ask for help on, I'm having these challenges in the instructional environment, and they would leave with a handful of documents they had to fill out in things that they had to do that didn't necessarily work. I found that, when you have a school-wide support team that has a social worker, a school psychologist, a guidance counselor, all of the things can't be handed to one person. When someone takes on the responsibility of being a case manager that goes into partnership with that teacher, it's how do those resources come together to compensate for what we've lost in specialized staff members. There are, I could go on and on with layers of strategies, but it's a matter of systemizing those and monitoring them. When Superintendent Connor talked about wraparound services, how effective are our wraparound services? Is there a case manager following that students through those services? Did they get lost in them? Did they drop out of them? There are a multitude of things that need to become visible to our community or are visible to the community and how we address and improve a student's ability to be successful. Not every student can show what they know and can learn in the same way. We have to have tremendous flexibility, but yet that cannot all rest on the teacher.
I would say too, I know we're moving on to the next question, just to bring some context into it is, we talked about the ESSER funding, and that was, I was just looking at this number this afternoon, actually. It was $80 million that the school district had, and we had funded 182 positions using that funding. And so that is a shock to the system when you now do not have that. You got to pull back. And that we experienced some of that. And I'm going to be quite frank, we're not through that. That will continue into the next year as we really have to right-size some of that, because to pull all that out at once over the summer would have been just tremendous. It was tremendous enough some of the actions that we had to take over that 6-week time frame, but we're not through completely all of that process. And on top of that, there is a forecasting of declining enrollment. And so those are other things that we're going to be considering. So there's a lot to consider around financials, but it's not to say that if I couldn't afford to put a behavior specialist at every one of those schools or 3 of them, that I wouldn't do that, right? It comes down to what can you afford and what are the priorities.
If I can just jump in, I think all of that is true, everything that I heard. But at the same time, I was there when the ESSER dollars came in and the strategy was put forward for behavioral specialists and literacy coaches, and to use those dollars for that work to see what kind of impact that headcount would have. And where we're at today is, at least from just the experiment of looking at that headcount, was significantly better than it is today because we've taken people away, but the problems of why the behavior exists can come from a multitude of places, whether that's at home. I think social media and cell phones are absolutely connected to that behavior, but at the bottom line here, what we're dealing with today is a reduction of behavioral specialists, which is impacting the classroom, and we all say we're here for academic achievement, but it is impacting the classroom. But just in today's conversation, it not only affected the classroom, it's how do we staff for buses and what kind of headcount and things. And then I'm going to finish it by saying we're 49th or 50th in the country for funding public education, and you're asking us, or we're constantly robbing Peter to pay Paul and justifying headcounts when we don't have enough money to begin with.
If I could just add, being in education as long as I have been, there's been so many changes, but behavior hasn't changed. You still have the escalation of the behaviors. The teacher, I was a classroom teacher, I was expected to handle that. I had nobody that I could call on to come and help remove these kids. So fast forward to when I came to Sarasota, I was at Southside, and at that time it was a very, very diverse school, and it was just the principal and myself as a school counselor. I spent a lot of my time going and removing kids, escalating, and it was like 8 years until we had a behavioral specialist, and that's how I met Ms. Rose. She was hired at Southside, and it was such a relief to have somebody else that could help me deal with behaviors. So we were both in the preventative, but then if you had a student staffed, you've had IDEA adjusted multiple times, and now a parent can say no, they don't want services, so that means that the child remains in the classroom. There's just so many levels to it that it's just not as simple as saying, oh, we'll just hire a behavior specialist. I know for me, that was way up there of, thank goodness, I've got somebody else to help with their expertise. So I understand that is a big problem of dealing with the behaviors. And if you don't have the supports at home, it just makes it even harder, because we all know we take all children and we're expected to work with them no matter what. So I don't think in the next couple of years we're going to have a good answer for that. So.
I just wanted to kind of piggyback on talking about the wraparound and the tiered process. And you had talked about trainings and things like that. And I know our district isn't alone in the frustration with teachers. But one of the things I hear about a lot, and I'm formerly taught at McIntosh, the behavior unit, and at Oak Park. I think like one of the big frustrations and why we're losing some teachers is they're not getting administration support. And I think they feel very alone. And when you were talking about trainings and things like that, I think it might be worthwhile to get the administrators on board with getting some training themselves. Teachers getting frustrated with they're trying to get something going on, and the kid flips out, and then they come back with a bag of Doritos and a Capri Sun, and it's like, dude, support me, I need to be supported. And you have to back up. You have to back up mom, Dad can't always be the good guy. And I think if administrators had a little more training and a little more understanding about what's going on in the classroom, and then also for teachers to get a little bit more understanding about what the administrator is having to deal with also, because they have a different thing that they have to deal with. But that would be a nice little component to put into any trainings going forward, because we're not going to be able to replace all the behavior teachers.
I am so glad. I want to say amen to that. So one of the things we're doing, are you currently active teacher?
No.
No, yeah. One of the things that we've been really focused on, so we have a scope and sequence for our principal trainings, and we meet with all principals and all of our assistant principals on a monthly basis, and we have built that process into the training. So if you take a typical month, we meet with principals face-to-face one time, and then we have 2 virtual meetings. So then what we use for our virtual meetings is really more the operational types of things. The things that you need quick hit types of, I don't need to be in front of you to tell you about, maybe it's an operational piece, a mandate that's come down from the state, those types of things that you might get in a memo or an email. will go in the virtual calls. And then our face-to-face meetings are really centered around the academic and the behavioral aspects of the work. And I totally agree with you. And we have a principal that is here right now, the Dr. Rachel Shelley, who could probably testify to that on how we utilize that time to really talk not only the academic piece of it, but just even the behavioral piece and how that works here. I look over here over the shoulder and just by chance see the behavioral expectations here at Booker High School, because it does start with that, right? That's your tier 1. That's your universal expectation as a school. If you are a tornado, this is how you act, right? And so those are the types of aspects that we're bringing to those conversations with principals, because you're absolutely right. If it doesn't start at the top, it just doesn't, the teachers do not feel supported.
I'll echo that, because I think many of us have heard that feedback. I appreciate that statement, and I'm glad that you also mentioned the administrative part of it, because sometimes it's just a disconnect of communication too. And so whatever we can do to bridge that, because perception and reality can sometimes be different, and sometimes they're the same. And so, but that support is critical, especially when you're dealing with, I mean, I love how you say, support mom, because it's exactly, I can look at it that way. So I think that is critical. It's fundamental. And it's also, from a retaining standpoint, I mean, these are very stressful moments. And they're also a safety component as well. And so making that a high priority, which I know it is to this entire board, but that's extraordinary feedback, and I'm glad Mr. Connor was able to address that as well as far as how we're addressing it. So thank you.
I can add to that. I think that your experience spoke well to what works and what doesn't, and I interpreted the end conclusion of that there has to be strong communication. For example, if a teacher needs to have an immediate response when instruction's being interrupted and can't continue or the like, and the administration removes that student, and you can't put the student back until there is strong communication of what's going on. And even you mentioned taking the student back and they've got a bag of chips. I can tell you a story of times when a student would be removed, and as an administrative group, we found out that that student hadn't eaten in 3 days, the food stamps had run out, and mom, the single parent, isn't home, and there isn't any food. So the bag of chips was appropriate, but there has to be communication, and there has to be a deep understanding of why you did it, and are we collectively okay with this? And what you will hear in a school environment is that just takes time. But what I have learned the hard way is that time is far less time than when you have legitimate frustration with teachers not being able to teach the classroom and students that aren't equipped to be able to learn. So well said, and thank you for that, but I really see communication as the key, and the negotiation of are we both in agreement with what's happening at what time with this particular student. Because it isn't just about the student having the challenges. There are numerous other students in that classroom, and there's accountability that teachers want to fulfill in teaching and learning.
I think the thing that I heard here too is that's so important. And first of all, thank you for that feedback. And it wasn't connected to money. And that was really just really great feedback. The place that Ms. Rose points out is that there's oftentimes so many underlying issues connected to behavior, and sometimes food insecurity is one of them, and that's so many of the things that I've learned that teachers face on a day-to-day basis. And when there isn't somebody to help, there isn't that behavioral specialist, or there isn't someone to go to, and that's what my frustration is, where the dollars and cents do come in, because especially in Title I environments, those are places that we need to equip our teachers and equip our classrooms for just that type of situation. So those are the challenges that I see happen in public education every day here in Sarasota.
Mr. Superintendent, I just want to let everybody here know we're having network issues, so the live stream is kind of not working, but this will be posted after the meeting this evening and up on our YouTube channel in its entirety. So apologize for it's networking. So if it goes down, we can't stream. So We have a question right here.
Thank you so much. Hi, my name's Avery Cole, Booker here, student here at Booker, sorry. Two things. My 2 cents on the time change. I think that 7:30 works 7:30, yeah, sorry, it's a tired day. 7:30 works great for many students, including myself. It's great to get here early in the morning. I feel very awake in the morning, gets me ready for school. And it's a great opportunity for many students and many teachers to have the second jobs. I know personally, I have a job outside of school. He has a job outside of school. She does as well. And all 3 of my art teachers are also all professors at Ringling. So they all get to go and have that experience as well and teach more students. So I think 7:30 works great. Second comment, and I would love if any of you could answer, or if all of you could answer, that'd be great. With the moved meeting time to 10 a.m., I know there's been a lot of students coming to meetings. There's been a lot of people upset about that time change. I know at the last meeting, a lot of us proposed going back to 2 meetings a month, where we could have one at 10 a.m. and one at 6 p.m. And I'm wondering what your guys' opinions are on that, because I know in the past when we had the time change, you guys said that internally it was working great and was flowing better, but externally for us, we've seen more items on the agendas, not a lot of time to prepare. And also, while we are very grateful for all these opportunities outside those meetings, for us, we kind of feel that those meetings can't be replaced, because that's our only time to talk to you on policy about items. And so I just want your guys' opinion on going back to 2 meetings a month, with one at 6 p.m. and one at 10 a.m., so all can have the opportunity to attend.
I'll start on the frequency per month, because that I always tell the board, I own that. I was the one that brought the suggestion to move to 1 meeting per month, and you see this as a trend, you know, in a lot of places. From a staff perspective is where I came from with that perspective. And that's why we started instituting these meetings, to have more dialogue with community members. So I do understand, like, I don't want to negate the fact I understand the rationale of the 2 meetings and having the FaceTime. From a business perspective, the 1 meeting per month brings a lot of efficiency for the team to focus on the actual work versus having to do all the preparation and there is a lot of back-end preparation to a board meeting. And the efficiency of getting items approved, doing the business of the board, all of that has worked rather well with the 1 meeting per month. Now, I'm not going to speak for the board. Just from a business aspect, the 1 meeting I'm a proponent of, and that's because it allows our staff to really focus in and not spend, it literally, when I say if we have 2 meetings a month, as soon as the first meeting's over, they are in the trenches getting ready and prep for the second meeting of the month and having to do there are probably 7 layers of approval for 1 agenda item, because it goes through the department, it goes through the legal, and that legal takes, if we're lucky, we could get it back in 3 days. But depending on the work there, and then by the time it gets to the superintendent, then it gets to the board, because I actually meet with each of the board members one-on-one, which takes 2 days worth of work to go through that. It's a lot to just do that cycle of work, and that's less time that I can be in schools. It's less time for them to be out and about and engaging with communities. It's less time that our staff is. And so just from that aspect is why I said I would like to move to 1 meeting per month. Now, what that has done is it's impacted like public FaceTime with the board. And so instituting a format like this was something that we're trying out, to have more of a dialogue and public comments and a little bit of a different way of doing it, but to make up for some of that lost time with not having the second meeting. But I would defer to each of the board members to speak on their perspective about that, but just that's why the board has decided on the time. I have decided, I was the one that really pushed and supported the 1 meeting per month.
So I'm going to speak on the frequency, and then I'll go to the time. So when it was first proposed, so let me take from the big picture. I think from a board's perspective, And certainly from my personal perspective, I want to ensure we have transparency. I want to ensure there's accessibility. I want to ensure that the community can see what's happening and has a way, in multiple ways, multiple mediums to access that and be able to share their opinion and feedback so that we can make those decisions accordingly. So when it was suggested to go to one meeting a month, I was a little concerned because historically I only knew 2 meetings a month. It had varied from 10 o'clock to the 3 o'clock meeting to a 6 o'clock meeting and vice versa. And I'll get to that in a minute because that's why I always say there's always feedback on some people like one time, some people don't like another meeting. And there's certain agenda items on the 3 o'clock and people say, oh, you put it on the 3 o'clock to not, so they could avoid the community knowing or giving feedback. So instead of the 6 o'clock, which that's not, none of those are the case, but it just, the optics or the frustration will come out however it is. But ultimately, the accessibility and the transparency has always been the critical piece. So I think it's imperative that a elected body, a government body, ensures that the people can access and understand what their government's doing. And I can tell you, in the 10, 11 years I've been on this board, we have moved light years. Not only is it accessible online, are you accessible to view on demand, but in real time. Also, these town halls and different mediums and able to have the two-way dialogue. I know that, as mentioned before, with that public comment piece, sometimes it's very frustrating when you'll have a couple hours of public comment, and by the way, our district is one of the most rare districts that we do not put a time cap on our public comment. Almost most do, overwhelmingly most do, and it's something like 35 to 45 minutes, just to give some perspective. Sometimes they'll suspend it, but it's very commonplace to have a limited, a time certain amount of public comment. And that's something I know I personally cherish. I think it's very important to make sure that we allow that as well. But I think that over the years, when Mr. Connor suggested it, and we were doing, and still are, doing tremendous work, the point's well taken of, I want to make sure that the community still has accessibility, so that to cut that off was concerning, but can we also get done the really important work that is what we're here for, which is academic achievement, making sure we're turning things around, making sure we're getting the systems in place to execute things that I feel like had been lagging for quite some time. And the proof is in the pudding, which I believe that's being demonstrated. And so at first, I think it was done on a trial run, and I have seen, one, that maybe the agendas are longer, but even when I assess what's being brought forward in public comment, and I actually did go back since then, overwhelmingly more of the comment, as I mentioned in the last meeting, has been on the time and the frequency, but not so much on the actual substance of the agenda. Now, that's not across the board, but probably over the majority has been. And so to me, I think the process of what are we limiting? Is it really substantive, or is it more just people like that frequency, but there's nothing substantive that I feel like we're cutting off. If there was, and I think that's why I've mentioned it, from my perspective, was going to be assessed. Is there a negative impact, or are we improving processes while not limiting our accessibility to our public? I don't believe we have. I would say the 10 o'clock meetings have been very well attended. This is a 6 o'clock, obviously it's not a school board meeting, but it is, I thank everyone for coming, but it just depends you just never know. It's very hard to hit that mark. And as a working parent, I can understand that 10 o'clock can be challenging, but I also know that I was a working parent with kids that I make dinner, I have them running around from softball. That's a very common situation for many of our parents. And if there was an incident or issue that was on an agenda, I know that I have a medium, whether it be calling, sending up an email, or actually taking time off to go, which is not ideal, but I'm saying that we all have, there's a multitude of mechanisms to ensure that people in this community can reach their elected officials. So, and I believe that today was a great example. We had many, many people email us in regards to the time change, all of which there's sometimes when it's hundreds because it's more of an organized effort. I may not be able to respond to every single one, but we've been able to provide feedback and receive it and actually make policy decisions accordingly. So that's my take.
I'll just, add a little potentially slightly different perspective, which is that I don't hate the frequency being once a month. I understand the cadence of the work that school districts do and the way that agenda items are brought forward. So I haven't necessarily found that to be as disruptive as I anticipated it being. That said, I would like to see more opportunities like this. I think this is our third this year. Ideally, just as one board member, I'd love to see it monthly. I don't know that that's possible, but that would be my preference. I absolutely have concerns regarding the time, not just for students being able to attend, but I do believe teachers and staff have the right to petition their governing body that most closely represents them and impacts them. And I think when it comes to matters of policy and budget, they are the people most directly impacted by that. And I understand that they do have the opportunity to email and talk to us, and oftentimes they feel not particularly comfortable coming to a school board meeting, but at the end of the day, we're an elected body that serves the people. And to me, it's really important when people come to you and they say, this doesn't work for us, that we not just listen, but not just hear them, but really listen and make decisions that respect that feedback. So I'm not a fan of the 10 a.m. meeting. I'm perfectly happy with some sort of rotating schedule, 10 a.m., 6 p.m., although Ms. Ziegler makes a good point about folks being unsettled when you put agenda items on one versus the other. So I do take that. I agree with you there. So, I think everyone knows where I stand, but I very strongly believe that people have the right to be heard by the people that they elect to represent them.
I would also say everyone knows my feeling about a 10 o'clock meeting, so I don't need to address that. But I have seen instances, and just recently, where we had to have an exec session interrupt a normal board meeting, and that caused a whole lot of confusion and angst for the public who had spent hours waiting to have their say for that one time a month. And I've seen that kind of thing happen maybe 3 or 4 times since we have adopted the one meeting a month. So I think better planning on where those kinds of things do bottleneck can cause angst, not just for the public, but frankly, as a board member, it has bothered me. At the same time, I do love the efficiency that the superintendent brings to the one board meeting a month, because it is streamlined. We do have the meeting, that one-on-one session, and we're focused in on that place. I do think that I do like these town hall, and I think one of the reasons why it's not attended today is a lot of people are in Tallahassee speaking on the Schools for Hope legislation, so I don't want to say people aren't interested. They're just not interested in us today. They're interested in Tallahassee and the holidays, sure. But where I see a greater place of efficiency, not at the school board meeting, but at the workshop level. Because if you notice today's workshop, we had 2 very healthy conversations that was a really nice exchange between the board members that went back and forth, and it was comfortable, but there were only 2 topics per se, and I feel like we don't have enough of that because there's so much to talk about. There's so much that we should be exploring, and there's follow-up. So for example, we just went through a reorg the start of this year with how we handled behavioral specialists, whether that was through the Florida Center or how we were going to redeploy those folks. I'd love to hear, and maybe the public would too, how that's going. I'd like to know quarter by quarter, how well is that going, and do we need to make an adjustment? But to the school district's defense, there's always new stuff. We've got new schools opening, But you get my point. And then at the end of a school board session, instead of having public comment, could we add an hour, to Mrs. Ziegler's point, just an hour of town hall, where we take a couple of questions, answer them, and the hour's over, and that way we're doing this kind of exchange on a more frequent basis. It's connected to what just happened at a workshop, and then we can perhaps be more efficient in our monthly meeting. And I stress to Mr. Connor and his staff that we're getting better in the work aheads. They don't have to be as elaborate. I know you said you had to send it a certain way today because it was too large. I don't need it to be pretty. I just need it to have data and go from there.
Oh, I waited a lot. Yes, I did. Y'all are the school board, and sitting here listening to you, I have a new appreciation of what it is that you do, in the sense that you're not a social, and rightly cannot be that. But my parents were both teachers. I watched all that stuff go on. Some of no, my mom did not hit kids, but she really did have a way of maneuvering them, if you will, that would, I'm sure, no longer be permitted. Am I allowed to say this? I thought for many years that gotcha by the short hairs meant this, because that was the way my mom would maneuver a big bully student. She was a little lady like me, but she would just take somebody by the back of their neck and march them to the principal's office or wherever else. But I was thinking about the hungry kids. Is there a discreet, confidential, if you will, way that a student can let his teacher or whoever's in that role at that time, the behavior specialist or the principal or whoever, know? And I realize that they won't always do that because they're embarrassed. But I can get really forthright when I'm starving, and I imagine most kids can too. That was really where I started, but I do have a new appreciation that you guys have got your stuff that you need to do about school and all, and you're not a social agency.
Yeah, I'll start us off. It is definitely an ever-present issue, and I go back to this community and how much support there is, and I see Kirsten Russell over there, and she comes to mind when we just talk about these types of things. And we've had a great partnership with All Face Food Bank, and we have food pantries. I see a Wilkinson parent here tonight, and we do that on a weekly basis. So we have a lot of wraparound services related to specifics, whether it's mental health, whether it's food insecurity. And we do our best. Our social workers do phenomenal jobs of making that connections along with our counselors. Our teachers are very attuned to knowing when they observe needs that they make the right connections. Do things fall through the cracks? Potentially. Nothing's perfect, but I think we have cast a net throughout our schools in support of, with support of our community partners, to be able to intervene in those types of situations regularly. And the food insecurity, like the backpacks we do, we get those on a weekly basis, where mobile food pantries are coming to our Title I schools. They're opening up the floodgates. They're packing the meals for the weekend to take home to the families. There's a lot of support that happens there.
I think we're very fortunate. This is a community that there are zero reasons for a student to go hungry or for a family to go without. The supports in Sarasota County are tremendous. I think that one of the challenges is that not all students know how to communicate that they don't have food. And even sometimes it's not embarrassment, they actually don't have the words, or who do you address that to? How does that happen? What does that pathway look like? And I think the onus becomes on us as the resource to them. For example, most schools have the teachers welcoming students in the morning, whether it's in the parking lot, off the buses, and the school staff and the administrators, and at the doors of the classroom, so you can actually read the student and develop relationships, because we're the adults and we need to teach them what is that language, who do you approach, what words do you use, and it just doesn't stop with elementary, having served elementary students for over a decade and then going into adolescence. It actually grows where they don't know how to express a lot of things. So that is our job as the adults and the resources to them. But we're extraordinarily fortunate in Sarasota County to be a model nationally on how to take care of every student's needs when it comes to financial resources.
If that's the basis for a lot of this behavior, it seems like that would be a place to start.
It's a part.
Yeah.
It's absolutely a place to start. It is knowing the second that they come onto your campus, it's actually building a culture. I put the onus individually on, certainly Superintendent Connor does a fabulous job, and the leadership of each school. The onus is on them to create that culture amongst your staff of reading your students. It isn't just about every student being robotic in the lesson that we put down in front of them. That can't be our only job. We're dealing with human beings. And we need to develop those relationships and teach them how to advocate for themselves. What does that look like? And it isn't something that comes naturally to a lot of young people. And it isn't about being 5 or 6 years old. I can tell you that 9, 10, 11, and 12-year-olds are all experienced at navigating it.
And it's a great point. I think that from the board's perspective, we're looking at things at the macro level and an aggregate, but you have to realize that there are human beings attached to all of these things. And as Mrs. Rose mentioned, we do have extraordinary partners. I think many other districts look at us with envy because we have such a philanthropic, rich community that partners with us to provide those supports. And I can tell you one of the first experiences was working with some of the members in this community to say, hey, we provide a variety of things, very discreet, talk to teachers, talk to administrators so that they know that those resources are available to them so that they can support those families and they can focus on coming to school prepared to learn. So we are very fortunate.
And I think it's also important to work with all the adults at the school level of what signs to look for. And if a teacher will notice something, are they falling asleep during the day? They can't keep their eyes open. The food, you'll see many teachers have snacks or a loaf of bread and peanut butter, and then it's the whole class, except if you're peanut allergies, so you bring other things, but peanut butter is kind of like the universal because it's affordable. But it's really looking for those signs. And then I know for me, teacher would refer a student and as the school counselor, and then I knew that there was something much more going on, and refer to the social worker, who is the one that really has those connections with the community. Because, when you're at the school level, you've got 500 kids, where with the social workers, they can go to the house, make the referral. And I have to say, one of the biggest supports to our families is the season of sharing. And that is it's been going on for a long time, and it has a tremendous impact on families because it can help with a multitude of things. And if you're not familiar with the seasons of sharing, That is through the Community Foundation, and it, you know, there's a referral process, but they can help with a magnitude of things. So that's where our social workers are critical to help. But it's really looking for those signs to begin with and making sure all the adults know those signs to look for.
I'm grateful to hear how our board responds to those conversations, because I think everyone that sits on the dais feels that way about our community and our students and their families. What I think is the community is unaware of, and sometimes is that 50% of Sarasota is at or below the poverty line. And that's a fact, and that is reflective in our school district. So it shows up in Title I environments that I refer to as Title I environments. And in my mind, when poverty enters a household, so does trauma. And trauma comes in various capacities of what that household is dealing with. And so where the challenge is asking our teachers and our staff to have all of those ready kind of things available to know how to solve the problem. Because at the end of the day, when we talk about behaviors, hurt people hurt people. And so that's what we're kind of dealing with in that those bad behaviors, the kids are acting out of wherever it's coming from or whatever they're being exposed to in that traumatic environment of poverty. And again, it comes in so many different ways. There are systems, there are processes. One, again, the Community Foundation is here, that I learned from them, is called 2Gen, and it is a system where that's involved at every school, and it's that those people's work and function and processes to make sure that in a Title I environment that it's not just taking care of the student, it's really reaching into the family household and solving their specific problems so the trauma goes away and the kids arrive to school ready to learn. It's a long, expensive process, but it works. The documentation shows that it works. And it's a place that I know that Sarasota would like to get to. It just seems that every time we have a moment to take a breath to try and get there, something else comes up.
Hi. Just really quickly, I'll just talk about behavior and everything. It got me thinking about what I think everyone here can acknowledge, and that there's a mental health crisis in schools all over the place. And I mean, I see it here at Booker. I can't tell you the amount of times I've seen people cry. I've lost count of the amount of times I've held people who are crying. I mean, it's a problem across the board. And I think we can go on about the causes, social media, bullying, all sorts of things, for a long time. But one of the things I've observed as a student in the schools is that there is a lack, and maybe it's just not apparent to me, of in-our-face resources. For example, you guys have talked about counselors and social workers and those types of things, and I realize that those, especially social workers, those are for specific situations. I can't imagine the social worker can care for all 1,800 people here at Booker. I mean, and the same thing with the counselors. The counselors, I mean, mental health is supposed to be an aspect of their job, but they also do scheduling. They also do so many different things that, I mean, it's hard to get an appointment with a counselor sometimes, quite frankly. So, you know, the only thing I ever see, quite frankly, is the resiliency program, which, while it is a thing and it helps a little bit, it does not deliver the assistance that I think me, other students here, and students across the board need. So one of the proposals I saw just a couple years ago was from Tallahassee, where a state senator proposed giving all students, and this is just an example, 2 mental health days every single semester, excused absences, and those types of ideas, which provide, I think, students some relief, quite frankly, and I speak for fellow students too, and it's not just ones with diagnosed mental health issues or ADHD or IEPs or 504 plans or whatever. I think that there is an exhaustion and there is a just constant mental health battle that I think almost every single high schooler, every single student I talk to is facing. So I'd love to hear any ideas from any of you or the superintendent about ways that we can combat that in the everyday student's life, not just those with severe needs or severe issues where a social worker or a school counselor might get involved.
Having been a school psychologist, I always enjoy talking about mental health because you're right, our students are struggling with their mental health, as quite frankly are our parents and our teachers. It's not an easy time to adult right now. And in the last several years, we've seen an increase in suspicion around social emotional learning, around mental health supports in schools, and sort of a reluctance to provide those services to students in a way that we had in the past, quite frankly. And so I'm just going to speak with you very, very honestly here. When I was a school psychologist, this was years ago now, I did group work, I did individual counseling, I made home visits, in addition to, of course, my testing load. But now it's my understanding from speaking with my colleagues that school psychologists largely test students all day. We're not given the same space to work with children in the way that they really need to be successful in school. And I find that to be very concerning, and that's a problem that's much greater than a Sarasota problem. That's a countrywide problem. But I would like to see the resources that we do have be much more well advertised to students. I had a student come up to me and say, "Oh my gosh, I had no idea I even had a school counselor." I said, "Oh honey, everyone has a school counselor. Just go ask the receptionist." But they were like, I didn't know. I didn't know there was such a thing as a school psychologist. So and then I have the social worker and school psychologist. Well, they hide me in the broom closet. I said, well, I know. I mean, obviously, we do get hidden in the broom closet sometimes. But all that to say, I think it's time for us to start having some really frank conversations about mental health again and not be so afraid to address it.
So I think, well, I would echo, we have to have a very frank conversation about mental health because it is a serious aspect. Over the years, pre-school board, have had a very direct experience with family members who've dealt and struggled severely. And so I was very much a part of the, end the stigma kind of advocacy, et cetera. And I will say on the flip side, I am disheartened in a large way because I think things have, over the years, that whole aspect has actually been exploited in certain sections where it's like an all or nothing, and I think that doesn't benefit students either. I highly recommend, and you may not agree with all of it, but I think it opens your eyes to a lot of things. I recommend the book Bad Therapy, and to understand some of the things that have gone wrong, as particularly in schools, and where there is a real need to rebuild trust. Because there are students that need that, and there are families that need that support too, and that should not just go by the wayside. But there has been something that has gone off the rails to the point where it has become almost an all or nothing. And that doesn't really help students build that true resiliency or families build that true resiliency. And so, I'm probably more on the extreme on this end because I've seen, and these aren't just philosophical things, they're actual. And you can understand where there is a resistance to certain initiatives or implementation of certain things where there are policymakers who say, no, we can't do that. We can't risk going down that road again. But at the same time, then you have a swath of students that are being left without the services and supports that they need. And so I think we do need to have a very candid conversation. We need to understand what worked, what didn't work, where we went off the rails, and how do we build that back so that we can have that support system in place so that our young developing minds, because particularly it's challenging if you think about middle school and high school, those are very volatile, emotional moments for all human beings for the most part. And how do we support that and still stay in our lane as a school system as a publicly funded school system, and making sure that the right people are making those decisions. So I welcome that conversation because I don't think just avoiding it's the right way, but I also think there's a real need to understand perhaps some things that we cannot afford to make those same mistakes again.
What I hear you saying is that, one of the things I feel like that I heard you saying, that you aren't aware and students aren't aware of the things that are available. And when I look to the needs in our schools, that's something that is essential, so I would have to look to the superintendent. I know traditionally, having learned things in the roles that I've played in this district, we have so many resources that not only at times have students not been aware of what those are, but school-wide support teams have not been aware of what they are. I know when I've worked with foundations in the past, and they were providing us with grand opportunities financially, we experimented with making all of that very visible. And not only making those resources visible, but again, when a student approaches and enters into one of those resources, whether it's a community therapeutic resource or it's an in-house visiting counselor, that there has to be some kind of case manager that monitors. You just can't attach the student to the resource. You have to see where are they progressing in that. So I would look to our superintendent to see where are we in that process, because that is quite actually age-old, where we are fortunate with resources. We have a multitude of those that other districts do not have. We've gone over that. But are they visible? Are they in the hands of every student? Are they visible to parents? How do you access them? And once you do, that's just the beginning. It's not the end. So I would look to our superintendent on how visible we are with students, with staff, and with families.
Yeah, I would say right here at Booker High School, is it TJ? I'm trying to think of it. He is on my student advisory council. Is it? CJ, I'm calling him TJ. This is the topic, I mean, CJ has been very adamant about this particular topic around knowing how to access your mental health resources. And so I say all of that because we need to hear from students about what they feel they need in terms of it. We can sit up here and guess about, oh, well, you need stress management techniques, you need one-on-one counselor, you know, but there is, where is the origin of the anxiety? Where is the origin of that stemming from? You know, at certain schools, it may be the pressure of academics, right? They got to measure up to their peers when it comes to academic performance. Maybe it's here, it's visual arts is the stressor. I don't know. Maybe it's the football team. You guys are doing really good. But it's not as simple as just kind of putting out universal. It has to be tailored to the student. And so when we meet in January with the student council, and I know CJ has made this a topic, we're going to be discussing that with some of our experts, our in-house experts, along with student input to devise those strategies, like you said, maybe not rising to the level of crisis intervention, but the day-to-day. You know, how do I deal with some of that anxiety, that stress, that whatever I'm dealing with? And then how do we make that more accessible to students? So I think the answer is in the students. We got to get it, and we have to draw that out. Because you're right, we have all the available resources. We've got pamphlets, we've got one-pagers, we've got mentors, we've got clubs, we've got so many things. How do we make sure that people know how to use that and pull those levers when needed? So I'm excited about what's to come out of that in January.
If I could just comment, every time, because most of my career has been in student services, when we've been able to add counselors, what's the first thing that gets cut when the money is tight? It's your counselors, it's your support staff, because it's the classroom that we have to really focus on. But I like to look at the whole child, because you can be as smart as you can be, but if you've got some issues, you need to have somebody to talk to. So I know when I first got on the board, and then when Mr. Connor came on, I think the first thing that I really focused on was adding more counselors in our schools. Many years ago, we got a federal grant, and we added at Title I schools social workers, psychologists, and counselors. And I was directed, if you can show that these supports have a direct impact on student learning. And we had 3 years of data, and we did, so the superintendent at that time said, I will put the monies in the supports. Well, you know, those monies have dried up, and there's just more and more and more and more that the schools are supposed to do, and we do have a lot of unfunded mandates. So we're responsible for funding it. So you're trying to look at that whole big picture and to look at the whole student. But the bottom line is it's going to be the academic that always takes the front, and then you build up with all those supports. And that's why it's so important that we have the community. But with that, when you have outside people come in, you have to be very careful versus when they're school, and you know what, when they're school employees, you have more control, and that's probably not the right word, but of what is going on versus having sometimes outside people come in, especially when you're dealing with the social emotional part of children. That's how I feel. You got to be really careful, and you got to make sure that person is trained to deal with those issues and know when to refer it out or whatever. So it's not something you can take lightly. So.
Thank you, everybody, for coming tonight. This is really awesome to have the chance to talk to everyone at the same time. I hope you had a wonderful holiday. With that being said, everything that was touched upon, when it comes to school meeting times, you probably have heard that out the wazoo. So this is a great opportunity to be able to have a conversation. And since we're talking about mental health and Title I and funding, Wilkinson, that's my heart. That's my next 8 years. Thank you. I don't have to go anywhere, but you will be seeing me for the next 8 years. We're working as a team for my kids and the rest of the kids in this district. So my question is, with the mental health focus that we're talking about and the funding, I feel like the position that may have possibly disappeared that helps incorporate the student, parent, district is maybe that homeschool liaison position that was cut out. And there's still a few of them, and they're amazing at the schools that they're at, and they're able to facilitate between the teachers and the students and the parents and the counselors and the social workers. But we don't have one, and that's a huge expense. So how can parents work with the district, work with our kids to become resilient? Because there is a great program that the Florida Department of Education has. We just haven't rolled it out here in Sarasota County yet. I took the training. It's great. But we have to have that mental health. So how do we work as parents with you to figure out how we use the funds and see a roadmap of where we're going so that we can protect our kids with all these upcoming changes? If we only have one meeting and we're able to talk like this once a quarter, are there going to be more of these, like once a month on different subjects? How can we work together to make sure that this plan is transparent, everybody gets their questions answered, and we all work together to see where we're all going to help our kids? That's a lot. Am I making sense?
Yeah, I think
too many in one?
I think you are. There's a couple of things I want to clarify in that, because some of what you said would be more provided from the school district side of things. So like so our team would work with you. One of the ways that we do that, and I can see us moving towards our next parent university being, we just recently had one that was on social media, and we brought in an expert speaker to talk about how to help parents equip them with how do you know the danger, how do you identify those dangers, things of that nature to keep their kids safe online. What I hear you say, what it would be a great topic for parents would be something around what supports can I be providing when my students are exhibiting mental health negative behaviors, right? Those types of things. I don't know that the board would necessarily engage in that as a governing body, but obviously you could use these opportunities to talk about those impacts or the need for some of those so that we can continue to address that. So thank you for the idea. Parent University needs to be around some mental health supports for parents. We can work on that as a future topic. And what was the other part? I think I addressed that piece.
For our school specifically, like resiliency when it comes to the teachers, how do we keep our staff in there and get the staff that we need to keep our students from exhibiting those behaviors? If they are scared their school's going to close, we're going to have school avoidance issues. We're going to have anxiety when our favorite nurse isn't there to stop our nosebleed. And we have a substitute that says, I'm not coddly, I'm not a nurse, but I'm here. I know we've got positions being filled. But in that meantime, how do we rebuild that resiliency in these kids that have been affected and are exhibiting those behaviors?
Yeah, I think that's a case-by-case basis. I think we'd have to look at that and diagnose that to a degree. I hear what you're saying. I don't know that I have a response to that right here on the spot, but I would say this on a positive note, regardless of, this is just hot off the press, the board, so you'll know this. Although there's been some stress with Wilkinson, the data, the progress monitoring data today for third grade was extremely high compared to where it was last year. So our students are responding well, thank goodness. And they're being resilient, even on that progress monitoring 2 test. Let's hope it translates to progress monitoring 3, which really counts. But those are strategies that we'll continue to look at. I appreciate you bringing it up. Those are things that we can focus in at Wilkinson if we see that there's supports needed there. We'll be glad to take a look at that.
Thank you for sharing measurable goals.
Yes.
All right, well, thank you, everybody, for being here. It's 7:30, and we're going to go ahead and wrap this up. I'd like to thank the school board for being here this evening, superintendent, obviously you all, our partners, our police force, and our fantastic principal of Booker High School for hosting us, the communications team, and that'll be all for this evening. So thank you very much, and again, we appreciate all your feedback.